I approached my mother-in-law, Margaret, and said, "Could you please help me with this?" But there was no response. I wondered if she didn't hear me, so I repeated it loudly, but still got no reply. Unbelievably, for the next 2 years, my mother-in-law continued to ignore me. No matter how much you dislike someone, is it even possible to go for 2 whole years without saying a single word? On one such day, as I glanced at the trash disposal area, I noticed various things from my room that had been thrown away. "Did you throw away my belongings?" I asked my mother-in-law. "Yes, that's right. You're no longer worth living here. Useless middle-aged nuisances like you are just wastes of space." Having been told that, I had reached my breaking point. If that's the case, then I might as well leave. In silence, I gathered my essentials. I'm Emily, living with my husband in the outskirts of New York. I'll be turning 35 this year. My husband, Andrew, is younger at 30. I met Andrew through a friend's introduction. Because I had been focused on work and remained single for a long time, my friend took pity on me and brought us together. At first, I was completely uninterested in Andrew, despite my friend's kindness. I maintained a distant attitude towards Andrew, who occasionally reached out after the introduction. However, one day, I made a significant mistake at work and was feeling incredibly down. On that night, unable to sleep and lost in thought, I coincidentally received a message from Andrew. Andrew expressed genuine concern for my unenergetic response and asked the reason. I explained about how I made a significant error at work and felt despondent. Surprisingly, even though it was well past 1 a.m., Andrew exclaimed, "I'm coming over right now." Despite not being familiar with the area, he rode his scooter for an hour to reach my home. The following day was a weekday, and Andrew had work as well. I apologized for him coming over at such an hour. However, Andrew responded, "But did it make you feel a bit better?" Showing his innocent smile to me. Upon reflection, I realized that Andrew's actions had distracted me from my failure. When I thought about it, making a mistake didn't mean my life was over. I managed to lift myself up, encouraging myself that way. Andrew was genuinely delighted in seeing me in higher spirits and said, "Well then, make sure to get some rest and be ready for tomorrow." With those words, he hopped back on his scooter and headed home. From this incident, Andrew had completely touched my heart. Since then, I started initiating contact with Andrew more often, and after 6 months, we officially started dating. Despite the fact that he was younger, Andrew was incredibly kind and had a masculine side to him. When I was 28 years old, Andrew proposed to me, and we decided to get married. At that time, I was living in a rented apartment, so Andrew moved in there with me, marking the beginning of our married life together. Andrew and I lived harmoniously, and there were no issues between us. We often went out together and were seen together. So, we often heard comments like, "You two are really close," from our neighbor. After 4 years of marriage, we decided to move into a single-family home. Life in the apartment had been fine, but as our belongings increased and the space became cramped, we felt it was time for a change. The next 2 years went by without any major issues. We had fully settled into our new environment and were enjoying a comfortable life, until one night, we received a phone call that Andrew's father had collapsed. Andrew and I hurried to the hospital, but unfortunately, we didn't make it in time, and his father passed away. While the loss of Andrew's father was undoubtedly sorrowful, there was one lingering issue: Andrew's mother. Until then, I had tried to avoid interacting with Andrew's family as much as possible. Whenever it was unavoidable, Andrew's father would step in and treat me kindly while his mother was cold towards me. In a sense, Andrew's father had always been considerate of me. With his passing, the question of how to navigate my relationship with my mother-in-law became a concern. When we rushed to the hospital, she clung to Andrew in tears, but completely ignored me. Even during the funeral, whenever I tried to help with something, she would snatch the task away and ask relatives, I'm sorry, could you please help me with this? I spent the entire time feeling awkward and idle. Sometime soon, Andrew began to express, we need to keep an eye on Mom's well-being from now on. I'm worried about her living alone. I felt quite anxious about this. I had been hoping that Andrew wouldn't bring up that topic. But inevitably, that moment arrived. One day, my mother-in-law tripped at home and hurt her back, requiring a hospital visit. While the injury wasn't severe, this incident had made Andrew's decision. I'm worried about Mom being alone. Maybe we should consider living together, he suggested to me on that day. I had hoped that it wouldn't come to this. The idea of living in the same house with my mother-in-law is something I don't want to imagine. However, I don't have any other reasons to decline living together. Despite my hopelessness, my mother-in-law was gleeful. I'm just so happy that I get to live with you, Andrew, she said, all hyped up. The underlying reason for my mother-in-law's dislike towards me is because of Andrew. Andrew was an only child, and his mother showered him with excessive affection while raising him. As a result, she always treated women who got close to Andrew with a harsh attitude, and this is why Andrew struggled to get married for a long time. When I first went to meet my in-laws, my father-in-law warmly welcomed me, but my mother-in-law immediately said, well then, aren't you going to make some tea for us? She knew what she was doing. As a first-time visitor to their home, it was impossible for me to prepare anything. I had no idea where the teapot, tea, or teacups were even located. Where is the tea located? I timidly asked. You can't even make a simple cup of tea? You're trying to become our daughter-in-law even though you can't do something so basic? My mother-in-law scolded me. At that time, I fortunately had someone who defended me. Mom, don't say rude things. Emily is visiting our home for the first time, so of course she wouldn't know where things are. My father-in-law stood up against her. My mother-in-law clearly wore a displeased expression, and she retreated to her room, not returning until I left. Furthermore, Andrew and I mentioned that we didn't plan to have a wedding ceremony when registering our marriage. A bride of your age who's too embarrassed to have a wedding? I'm disappointed. Poor Andrew ended up with quite the unfortunate woman, she exclaimed. Of course, my father-in-law would always step in to help during those moments, and that's how we've managed to navigate through such situations until now. Therefore, the idea of eventually living with my mother-in-law was my biggest source of anxiety. When the topic of living together finally came up, I was filled with an overwhelming sense of darkness. While Andrew tries to protect me from his mother's behavior, he has difficulty asserting himself against her due to their long-standing relationship. I can't imagine being helped by Andrew in such situations. And so, a life of us together filled with uncertainty began. On the day of the move, my mother-in-law arrived at our new home in a taxi, having a broad smile on her face. Clinging to Andrew and not leaving his side, she didn't lift a finger to help with the moving boxes, leaving me to carry everything into the house. My mother-in-law started to wander around the house. I like this room. Isn't this the brightest room? Let's make this room mine, she suddenly exclaimed. The room she pointed to was my room, and obviously, my belongings were in there. Margaret, unfortunately that's my room, I said. In that moment, she glared at me with an intense expression. What? Why are you using such a nice room? She shouted in a loud voice. It's only natural to give the best room in the house to the mother-in-law, isn't it? People should live according to their status. You, on the other hand, would be better off in a storage room in the back. My mother-in-law continued to rant and rave. Andrew then stepped in, saying, Come on, Mom. I'll give you my room. My room gets plenty of sunlight too. Hearing this, my mother-in-law quickly transformed her expression into a smile. Oh, Andrew, you're such a sweetheart. You're the breadwinner of this house, so you don't need to do that. In situations like this, it's a manner for the daughter-in-law to show respect by offering her own room to the mother-in-law. But Emily, you really do have poor upbringing. I can hardly sense any respect for your mother-in-law. No wonder you couldn't get married until you were older. With that, my mother-in-law continued her tirade, and with a sidelong glance at me, she walked with Andrew into the living room. In the end, the problem of my mother-in-law's room seemed to settle as Andrew agreed to give up his room, and her mood appeared to improve. However, from the very first day, I already felt a sense of despair. The thought of this kind of life continuing indefinitely cast a dark cloud over me. What would be waiting for me? I wondered. With these anxieties in my heart, our life began. Both Andrew and I were working, so until now, I had been doing the household chores after coming back from work. This time, with the cohabitation, I hoped that my mother-in-law would at least help with some of the housework. However, she didn't do any household chores at all. Despite having plenty of free time evident from her lifestyle, she didn't do any cleaning, laundry, or meal preparation. But there was something even worse than that. When I tried to talk to my mother-in-law and said, "Could you help me with this?" There was no response. I thought she might not have heard me, so I raised my voice and said, Margaret?" Still, there was no response. It was clear she was ignoring me, and she continued with her blatantly cold attitude. I was just exasperated by it all. It's unbelievable, but for over 2 years after that, my mother-in-law continued to ignore me, never exchanging a single word with me. Could it really be possible for someone to completely shut out another person for 2 whole years, no matter how much they disliked them? Moreover, I discovered that the meals I had prepared were sometimes thrown in the garbage, or she would leave the house to eat outside instead. Her selfish actions and the constant ignoring, which might seem subtle, were quietly wearing down my emotional state. I wondered if I had to continue living like this in the future. During that time, my only source of hope was Andrew's presence. However, Andrew slowly became busier with work, often coming home late and going on frequent business trips. I didn't want to constantly rely on Andrew, but when there's no one at home to share my concerns with, it becomes a life of enduring my mother-in-law's hostility. I wondered how long this kind of life would continue. Those were the thoughts that filled my head daily. One day, when I returned home from work, Andrew hadn't come back yet. As I was preparing dinner, including a portion for Andrew, my mother-in-law entered the kitchen and spoke to me for the first time in 2 years. "Oh, you don't need to bother with Andrew's portion. No one wants to eat this trash-like meal anyway," she said. I was surprised by my mother-in-law speaking directly to me, but her words were still dripping with sarcasm. "Since it's something made for Andrew, I'll be the one asking him whether he wants it or not," I replied. Upon hearing that, my mother-in-law briefly showed irritation on her face before quickly transitioning into a sly smile. "Emily, do you actually believe that you're needed within this household? Have you even noticed what your husband is up to?" I didn't understand the meaning behind her words, so I remained silent. She continued, "Andrew is currently obsessed with a more wonderful woman than you know? That's why he probably wouldn't want to eat your cooking anymore. He wouldn't even want to associate with you." "What?" Just at that moment, Andrew arrived home. He came in humming a tune, in a cheerful mood, and was surprised to see me and my mother-in-law engaged in a conversation. "What are you two up to in the kitchen?" he asked. I tried to ask Andrew about the meaning behind my mother-in-law's words, but the words didn't come out. At that moment, my mother-in-law chimed in, saying, "I was just sharing the charming story of Andrew's new adorable lover. After all, isn't it tiresome to have an aging wife waiting for you at home?" Andrew, without showing any remorse, responded, "Oh, so Mom spilled the beans, huh? It's not like I dislike you or anything, but nothing can compete with younger girls. Still, it's all just a casual fling, so it's no big deal, right? Why not just marry that girl then? I'd love to have a younger and more charming daughter-in-law around the house." the three of us can start a new life together. I'd love to have grandchildren too, my mother-in-law added. Grandchildren, huh? I wouldn't mind giving you some grandchildren. That might not be a bad idea, Andrew responded with a grin, and they both disappeared into the living room, laughing. Left behind, I was left bewildered, unable to move for a while, not understanding what had just happened. Little did I know, I would be confronted with something even more unbelievable the next day. Returning home from work with a heavy heart, I parked my car in the parking lot and happened to glance at the trash bins as I passed by. There, I saw a pile of familiar items. I quickly recognized without a doubt that those were my belongings. They had been thrown away. Hurrying inside, I went to my room, only to find it completely empty. My mother-in-law smirked and said, "Oh, you're back? You don't even need to bother coming back anymore." Her words dripped with maliciousness as she laughed. "Is it you who threw away my things?" I asked. "Of course I did. I even got someone to help me toss everything into the trash. You're worthless here, so just leave already. Andrew has found a new wife, and from now on, the three of us, Andrew, that girl, and I, are going to live here. Useless women like you are just a waste of space," she replied with a wicked grin. After being told those words, I had reached my breaking point. If that's how it is, then why not just leave? Silently, I gathered my essential belongings. And then, I placed a divorce form with only my section filled out on the table. Even though the decision to divorce was made, I wanted to have a sincere conversation with Andrew about it. However, it seemed like there was no longer any need for that. Seeing the divorce form, my mother-in-law looked pleased and said, "I should have kicked you out sooner. You better enjoy your meager life as a single woman." I left the house without saying a word. My mother-in-law was gleefully laughing, but she had no idea what would happen once I was gone. I knew her laughter was only temporary. For now, I booked a room at a business hotel near the station. I would have to commute to work from this hotel for a few days, but during this time, there were several things I needed to take care of. For a week, I commuted to work from the hotel while taking care of various procedures. During this time, I of course received no contact from my mother-in-law, and there was no communication from Andrew either. Despite being presented with divorce papers by his wife, he hadn't said a word about it. It seemed he didn't care about where I had gone or what I was doing. Andrew from the past wasn't that kind of person. Did living together with his mother change him? Or was he always like that, and I just didn't realize his true nature? It's a sad feeling, but there's no helping it. I can't imagine walking the same path with someone like him in the future. I have no choice but to focus on what I need to do. After another 2 weeks had passed, one day I received a call from Andrew on my phone. I was working at the office at that time, so I didn't pick up. After finishing work and checking my phone again, I saw that Andrew had called me numerous times. And then, I received another call from him. "Hello," I answered. Andrew's voice came through, frustrated. "Why didn't you pick up the phone all this time? What were you thinking?" "I couldn't help it, I was working." "What do you want?" "Don't play dumb. Today, a real estate agent came saying there's a buyer for this house, so they told me to leave." "Well, of course. I put that house up for sale half a month ago." "What?" Andrew was left speechless. I told Andrew, "You do understand that the house is under my name, right? If I can't live in that house anymore, then it's no longer necessary. You wouldn't expect that after being kicked out of the house, I'd leave it behind for you and your mother, right?" Actually, that house originally belonged to my father. It wasn't huge, but I had thought about living there after marrying Andrew. So, I had the house renovated by a relative's remodeling company at a reasonable price. As a result, it's in fairly good condition. With that in mind, I assumed that if I were to put it up for sale, a buyer would come forward quickly. The day after I was kicked out of the house by my mother-in-law, I put it up for sale through a real estate agent, and within half a month, a buyer appeared. Wait a minute. Are you seriously planning to divorce me? I wouldn't joke about leaving a divorce notice behind. Surely you're not going to ask me to come back now, right? Then the phone was passed to my mother-in-law. Emily? What do you think you're doing? Trying to kick us out of the house with such a dirty trick is absolutely despicable. You're truly the worst daughter-in-law. Buy the house back immediately. Huh? Who's really the worst here, Margaret? Weren't you the one who kicked me out of that house in the first place? Reflect on your own actions. Anyway, that house is already listed with the real estate agency, and if there's a buyer, you'd better leave quickly, or you might end up getting arrested by the police, you know? Then, my mother-in-law shouted loudly through the receiver. What did you say? You've been living off of Andrew all this time, so what's with that attitude? Who do you think enabled you to have this life? It's all thanks to me, I replied. Huh? If you didn't know that the house was mine, that's one thing, but did you actually think Andrew was paying for everything? Andrew's salary is only $960 after taxes every month. That's quite low even among average office workers' salaries. So, all the living expenses were covered by my salary. My income was more than enough to cover the expenses, and it's significantly higher than Andrew's. To put it bluntly, I'm the one who has been supporting you and Andrew. Do you understand now? $960. That can't be true, right? Unfortunately, it's true. So from now on, you and Andrew should try to manage to get by on your own. Oh, and you mentioned that Andrew's affair partner could become his wife, right? Well, that could be an option for you. Although, I'm not sure if anyone would willingly marry a low-paid office worker who's living with his mother. It's not like that, Emily. Please don't misunderstand. I was just joking around a bit. And Andrew feels the same way, you know. His feelings for you haven't changed. I was utterly exasperated by my mother-in-law's desperate excuses. To think I had endured living with this mother and son for 2 whole years, how much time had I wasted? Regret was all that remained. Anyway, I've already started a new life in a new place. I have no intention of getting involved with you two any longer. So, hurry up and file for divorce at the city hall, leave that house, or whatever you want to do. I won't have anything to do with it anymore. With that, Andrew quickly took over the phone and replied, Hello? Emily, please, maybe we can start over again. Can you reconsider? In a desperate tone. But in response to those words from Andrew, I felt a strong sense of disgust. I thought about how the Andrew from the past was a completely different person from how he is now. With that in mind, I said, I never want to see your face again. Take care with your mother. Goodbye. I heard some words being spoken from the other end of the line, but I hung up without saying anything further. After that, Andrew and his mother did not move out of the house easily. They were eventually served an eviction notice by the real estate agency and were forcibly removed from the house. Finding themselves in a difficult situation, they managed to rent a cramped apartment. For the long passage of time without any progress on Andrew's end regarding the divorce papers, I enlisted the help of a lawyer to locate Andrew's address. With their assistance, I managed to get the divorce papers submitted to the city hall and finally obtained a divorce. Naturally, Andrew's affair partner, upon learning of the situation, disappeared without a trace, cutting off all contact. It seems she managed to escape completely. This is something I learned later, but astonishingly, Andrew had voluntarily left his job after we started to live together. With my income available, he didn't face financial difficulties. Apparently, he used his personal allowance and money taken from my wallet to cover the expenses of his affair with the other woman. However, Now that he no longer can rely on my salary and has to support himself and his mother, things have changed. Andrew has been searching for a new job, but he hasn't been able to find a good opportunity. At present, he's working as a temporary security guard and doing odd jobs. Andrew told his mother to earn your own living expenses. She did look for a part-time job, but she couldn't let go of her previous carefree lifestyle, and the jobs never lasted. As a result, Andrew and his mother found themselves engaging in daily shouting matches and living in poverty. Since then, I've been living a comfortable and free life every day. Work is going well, and above all, having time alone at home brings me genuine joy. When I think back to those 2 years of living with my mother-in-law, I realize how happy I am now. I don't know if I'll ever get married again, but I'm okay with remaining single for the rest of my life. However, if a person comes into my life with whom I can share my life again, I would approach things more cautiously. If there's something I can't accept, I would be determined to have an open conversation about it. For now, I want to enjoy this life at my own pace and savor each moment while living it to the fullest.